Hello, my name is Megan Hutchison. In August, I'll begin my 6th year of teaching. The first 4 were in upper elementary, 4th and 5th grades, with the last year as my first year in junior high. Becoming an Abydos trainer was a huge boost of confidence in making the leap from elementary to big bad junior high, because the techniques are so highly adaptable. I'm happy to say that this presentation does not mark the first time that Abydos has validated my faith in the training that I've received from them. I'm even happier to say that this presentation does mark the end of this class. The question of the summer for me has been, does Abydos provide the needed components to implement the writing workshop? Well, that depends on whose bottom line, gotta do it, do I pass or fail this class definition we use for the word need. I was distressed to discover that, as part of this research project, we had to use my full opinion on what made up an adequate treatment of the writing workshop in the classroom. Lovely. After an embarrassing amount of time spent wondering how to start, I found that I kept coming back to this hypothetical young lady. New to the career, wading through endless seas of text aimed at teaching teachers. At heart, just wanting something that works and works well. She's overwhelmed, she's overstimulated, and she's asking me for help every day. Today, it's, how do you do a writing workshop? It's time to stop just showing her my tricks and give her something to help her to collect some tricks of her own. Ideally, the source that I would recommend would be easy to understand, easy for her to put into place successfully, and would make it easy to sleep at night because it assures that it's a job well done for both of us. With her in mind, my research focus became simple. Would the Abydos philosophy and methodology be good enough to help her implement a writing workshop? This study was meant to pose that very question of the experts. The data was collected during June and July of 2009 as a part of the requirement for the completion of EDU 585 Educational Research Methods at Fontbonne University under the direction of Dr. Kelly Barker, as you well know. Data was collected through online discussion group with individuals contributing to the information on the meta-analysis chart, providing a far wider selection of data than would have been possible in such a brief period of study otherwise. The names of the research group are listed in Appendix A with some notes as to who contributed what. Source literature was chosen to represent a fair overview of the available theory and research. Threats to validity included time, selection bias, and self-sponsored data. The study period was brief, but because of the collaborative approach, this was offset. Selection bias and the issue of self-sponsored data are not concerns, as this was a purposeful study seeking a response to a specific instructional need. Initially, the research group chose a mixed paradigm of quantitative and qualitative design, with content analysis measuring the content of the Abydos text against the available body of literature. As an Abydos trainer, it was not a stretch to hypothesize that Abydos could meet the standards set by the experts. The research team agreed to chart the data. The columns for the meta-analysis chart would be used to record data regarding terms, implementation, and key ideas from a variety of experts, sorted according to the component of the writing process with which they were associated. These components became the rows of our chart. This matrix provided the consistency between raters and can be viewed in full in Appendix B. Taking another look at our friend the new teacher, before recommending a source to her that would help teach her how to pull off a writing workshop, I'd need to explore 2 threads. What do the experts say a writing workshop is, and can Abydos and their information teach someone how to properly lead a writing workshop for themselves? Formally, that meant establishing who the experts were and determining the common definitions for the writing workshop and its components. The review of literature first served to establish expertise. We began with Read, Write, Think, which is a joint endeavor from the National Council for the Teachers of English and the International Reading Association. They gave us the initial breakdown of the writing process, and to those terms, we added the terms mini lessons and conferences because they seem to be where the actual instruction happened in the writing workshop. After we developed those terms, which Read, Write, Think verified as being acceptable terms, we also accepted as experts any authors that were recommended by either NCTE or IRA. Also included as experts were any of the Abydos labeled seminal works. As an Abydos trainer, there is a rigorous course of study of a collection of authors that all broke new ground with their publications. Nancy Atwell's in the middle. Carol Avery and Donald Graves with and With a Light Touch. Vygotsky's Thought and Language. All of these are works on which the entire Abydos philosophy and methodology rest. Considering that most of us in the research group are trainers, and most of us had studied all of those texts in depth, we all felt assured in making the claim that they were experts. So if Abydos labeled it as an expert, we also labeled it as an expert. In my interpretation, I took it one step further, and I separated all of the sources into one of three categories. The first category I classified as an Abydos text. I included those works primarily that were written by Joyce Carol Armstrong and Edward Wilson. This is primarily acts of teaching and a couple of others that are listed in the references. The second category were sources that I labeled Abydos-related sources. These were works or authors that were commonly cited or inspired by Abydos authors and texts. Robinson I include as one of these because she is an Abydos trainer. Many of her methodologies are based directly on Abydos teachings, and so several of those that are kind of within the Abydos sphere of influence I lumped into that category. Finally, I had a collection of works that were Abydos independent, that included the most recent research, policy, position papers from professional bodies like the NCTE or the IRA, and government, and most recent journal articles, that sort of thing. Things that works or authors that were not commonly cited, or they weren't common references for the Abydos source material. To support the hypothesis that the Abydos information can accurately represent the writing workshop, I began with the terms as defined and implemented in the Carolyn Wilson work, Acts of Teaching, with the thought that I must begin with the claims themselves in order to verify them. It was through the collection of this initial data that the Abydos credentials first gained support. In the Carolyn Wilson quote at the bottom of this slide, there are no less than 5 citations, depending on how you count, just to verify the harebrained theory that lots of people have written about pre-writing, which is hardly the most earth-shaking of claims. It is this impeccable eye for detail that is the hallmark of the Abydos and Abydos-related texts. Each claim in the Abydos philosophy and methodology is clearly backed with research. Attribution of others' work is so comprehensive in the Abydos texts that it would be difficult not to be consistent with current theory and best practice. The appreciative quality brings to mind the feeling that the Abydos texts almost serve the function of a detailed index of the world and history of writing instruction. Research on which techniques are based is not just documented, but flaunted, with the authors clearly encouraging further study on the part of the reader. Specifically compared were nomenclature, implementation, philosophy, and, surprisingly, formatting. Nomenclature. What was the most clearly observed in the case of the words used by various authors were the commonalities in the verbs. Just to take the one component of pre-writing and only looking at the verbs that were used to describe both the processes and the concept of pre-writing itself, the same terms were used consistently, regardless of author, regardless of whether or not they were related to Abydos. Verbs for pre-writing included warm up, thinking, generating ideas, getting ideas down, percolating, rehearsing, planning, organizing, brainstorming, collecting thoughts, journaling, free writing. Each of these terms is meant to reflect a slightly different facet of the same jeweled component. With implementation, most authors provided everything that was needed to help a writer find an idea, to build on it, refine it, and present it proudly, which really is the job of the writing teacher. The authors accomplished this by systematically asking a child what his or her struggle is and passing on different ways that you have solved that problem in your own writing. In Teacherese, Abydos follows this pattern and best practice by creating a differentiated, student-driven curriculum through extensive modeling and concrete rehearsal. Instruction happens in individual, small group, and whole group settings. Peers and instructor cooperate to teach each other Peers and instructor cooperate to teach one another in the craft of writing and its intricacies. Recommended instruction, according to the collected literature, follows a gradual release model, providing extensive guided practice before the student must perform independently. The implementation models stem from common Abydos and expert philosophy, namely, that there is no better instructional tool than an intimate knowledge of your students and what drives them. That instruction has the highest likelihood of retention if it takes advantage of learner sensitivity, teaching concepts that have relevance to the learner, and finally that practice makes perfect, so ample opportunity to practice should be provided. I have to say, one thing I am good at is building rapport with students. It's been noted on every principal evaluation I've ever had. It doesn't hurt that I'm young and hyper and geeky and chubby and not afraid to look silly. I am not the most threatening thing ever to belly up to the podium, which has its obvious drawbacks, a few of which were also noted on every evaluation. As such, I often wonder about whether my seeming chummy to students affects my hold on classroom management. Re-examining all of this literature has served to remind me of my real true strength as a teacher, because almost every work seemed to stress its importance. I listen to my students. It seems to me that especially in junior high, when kids are crying out to be validated, so few adults take the time to really hear what a kid has to say. The very reason I teach is to hear what brilliant or bullheaded thing is going to fall out of their mouths next. I had forgotten that my earnest interest in these minds and these lives, my excitement to see how these lives unfold, is a very powerful instructional tool when used intentionally. Having listen drummed in throughout this study has helped to remind and to reassure me. To find out what they need, what they lack, what they misunderstand, ask them. They'll tell you. The experts say so. I was also reminded of one of the core ideas that I value most about the Abydos philosophy and methodology: the simple and effective promotion of clear communication. Teaching writing at heart is just helping people say what they want to say. The Abydos texts uniformly begin there first. Now, I've often had a leap before looking kind of outlook. And my past few forays in the writing workshop in my own classroom have reflected that. The varying degrees of success I've had can be directly attributed to the amount of attention I paid to organization and documentation. I've already begun getting my classroom reorganized this year to cut out the clutter and to simplify the workshop. I've also been won over as far as delegating classroom maintenance jobs to students. If I expect that they aren't able to file their own work in a portfolio, then they'll continue to make me do it. Further, that by doing it for them, I've robbed them of a chance to practice self-regulation and self-reliance. By making that one small change, I look forward to seeing how my classroom evolves. I expect that I will be presenting this research to my campus as a professional development offering in addition to sessions that for district-wide training that are consistent with the Abydos training I already do. I expect that my own classroom workshops will be more efficient and less stressful simply as a result of my becoming more familiar with proper technique. Future research could continue to explore the correlations among Abydos methodology and philosophy and the body of expert research, such as examining specific techniques. In particular, a further examination is required of the use of mini lessons and conferences in the writing workshop. This study did address those two elements, but they really are the mechanism by which all other work in the writing workshop is done, and they deserve a more detailed treatment. Lastly, this study focused primarily on acts of teaching, and a more detailed examination could be made of the supplemental Abydos texts. Things like Dr. Jack's Writing Workshop Primer, Dr. Jack's Guide to Depth, any of those related texts. And returning for one last look at our little newbie teacher, I believe that I can feel confident in recommending the Abydos treatment of the writing workshop. It has all the pieces. But if you don't believe me, read and see what the experts have to say.